Welcome to Etudes Made Easy, improving your efficiency in learning etudes. I wanted to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm Dr. Patricia Surman. I'm the Assistant Professor of Flute and Director of Woodwind Studies at MSU Denver. I'm a Yamaha performing artist and was a Fulbright Scholar to Greece. My master's and doctorate are from the University of North Texas, and my major teachers include Mary Karen Clardy, Cindy Ellis, and Sarah Andon. Some of my research interests include performer-composer collaboration and American music, and as well as flute pedagogy. Why etudes? An etude is a composition designed to improve the technique of an instrumental performer by isolating specific difficulties. What that means is that an etude could focus on a specific technical challenge, a stylistic issue, or a general musical concept. And in my experience teaching, I've found that etudes are the bridge that connects practice with performance. So we work very hard on scales and studies, technical exercises. We work on repertoire, and etude is what connects the two of them. Like a bridge, it could be a very scary experience to take a step from practicing your scales and technique to performing on stage, and these bridges are designed to build confidence and to allow you to perform your best when under pressure. Failing to plan is planning to fail. This is a great quote by Benjamin Franklin, and one thing that I've observed both in my personal development and in working with students of all ages and all destinies. One of the biggest things that I notice when we're working on etudes is an etude is sort of like an analogy or even a snapshot into our overall musical practice habits. So I've noticed a lot of students were never really taught how to practice etudes, and the practice journey starts before you even get your instrument out of the case. And this is why I think this quote is so important, is because my talk is going to be largely grounded in planning your etude practice and planning how to be musically successful. So the first step in planning your practice is to create a practice space that inspires success. This is just going to save us a lot of time because we're going to be practicing every day. And if we take the time before we even get started practicing or tackling a large project in organizing our space and preparing for success, it'll all go a lot smoother. So I recommend that you collect all of the tools that you'll need and you keep them in the same spot every day. If you have a dedicated practice space in your living area, then this is perfect. You can just leave everything there. If you have to practice in a variety of locations, maybe get a small box or container where you can keep all of your practice items. So the tools you're going to want to have is a pencil, a notebook for taking notes on your own practice thoughts, a music stand, a metronome tuner, current music in a folder, and your bookshelf where you keep all of your sheet music, a video recording device and charger ready to go, and then a speaker for listening. I like to have an inspiration point. So for me, personally, I like to make sure that I can practice somewhere where I can see out a window and just observe nature. I guess I spent a lot of time practicing in practice rooms where you couldn't see outside. So I really enjoy having a practice place in my home where I can look out the window and, if it's a snowy day, observe the snowfall or the wind or the rain and just enjoy the fact that nature is out there. Another idea is to have a dream wall. And this could be a collage that you make of all of the different visual representations of things that inspire you and remind you of why you're doing this and what you want to get out of it. Another idea would be to have a small box of whys, where you could write down these whys on small pieces of paper and just keep it in a little box in your toolbox, especially if you're in a roving practice situation. Highly recommended is a source of replenishment, a pitcher of water and glass, so you can keep replenished as you're going. And then the last thing, and this is probably the most important thing, and one of the biggest challenges today, is to create an environment of solitude and focus. Practice is about looking inward and evaluating where we are. And in order to do that, we need to create a space of solitude. Turn off any notifications on your devices. Step away from social media so you can have a practice space that inspires success and makes room for introspection. Plan your time investment. Create a weekly schedule. In my weekly schedule, I have my students make at the beginning of each semester. I have them include all of their classes, meetings, lessons, work, meals, exercise, social time, and everything else. Your weekly schedule should have enough time to have adequate rest every day, and it should have time for meals, and it should have time for a little bit of social time. If you can't squeeze those 3 items in, then you might want to take a moment to really reflect on your own priorities and ask yourself if you've overcommitted in one way or another, and how could you cut back so that your weekly schedule makes sense. You want to make sure you plan on self-care. That means sleep hygiene, 8 hours of sleep a night. Nourish your body with nutrition. Take time to eat foods that are going to make your body feel better. And then we want to shake our sillies out. We need to exercise to release the stress. Practicing and going to school and working and all of these things are very, very stressful. If you don't allow your body time to exercise, that stress will just be built up, and over time it can manifest itself in very negative ways. So think about creating a weekly schedule that will set you up to achieve the goals that you want. Know thyself. Learn to your level. When we're doing etudes, we need to assess our own strengths and learning needs, review available literature, and then choose literature and create a learning plan that fulfills the goals of our learning needs. A lot of times when we're practicing etudes, we're doing that under the guidance of our teacher, and our teachers are probably already taking these things into consideration. However, maybe you have some time in the summer or on vacation to tackle a bunch of etudes. Before you pick the etudes you want to learn, think about where you are as a player and how will these etudes enhance where you are and allow you to get to the next step in your own development. That requires us to really know ourselves. And I think it's very important to take time to get to know our own strengths and our own weaknesses so we can adequately prepare ourselves to learn to the next level. If you decide to learn an etude, maybe, oh, you heard in the hallway that, such and such etude, those are the very hardest etudes, and you just want to accomplish them so you can feel good, you're probably slowing down your own learning by skipping important steps. So here's an example. I'm going to provide 2 real-world examples. Assess your strengths and learning needs. Maybe you're learning the 4A fantasy, and I actually, I'm working with a student on the 4A fantasy right now, and I was taking notes on a recording that she made, and here's some comments that I made. They're very sloppy because I just wrote them really quickly, but she was having a really big problem with double tonguing and subdividing. These 2 things are probably related. So if you were having such an issue, maybe you make a recording of yourself and you listen and you say, oh, I'm having a hard time articulating this fast passage. Well, the next step is, in this particular case, I opened up my app Fourscore, where I have a lot of Etude books downloaded from IMSLP. And I chose some literature that would help get this particular student to the next level. So the etudes that she's working on are all centered around articulation. And for this particular student, I thought that the Donjon Etudes des Salons would be really great for her level. And so here is an example of 4 different etudes from the Etudes des Salons that really highlight articulation. These etudes are available, like I said, on IMSLP, and you could get them and practice them all to practice different kinds of articulation issues. I only took a small snippet of each one, but so one of them has a lot of repeated articulation, so it's really great for practicing double tonguing on the same note. And then as you can see, the top one, it jumps around quite a bit, and the second one really jumps around and combines articulation with changing registers and some slurs over a very large range. So you can see how these etudes would really help a student who was needing some extra support in the area of double tonguing. Another issue that the student had was building smooth technique on the chromatic scale. So I reviewed the literature. I found literature that was on IMSLP, Scribd. You can find things on flute tunes, in the library, at school, etc., etc. I organize all my information using Fourscore and Dropbox, but organize all your information in one place, especially with the amount of etude book PDFs that are available. You want to keep them organized and readily available, so you don't have to waste a lot of time looking for stuff. Maybe this particular student is pretty advanced, so I chose these more advanced etudes from the literature to push the student to really build confidence with the chromatic scale. The first one, as you can see, uses a lot of sharps, so it's a little bit more taxing on the eyes. The last one is also taxing on the eyes with these 30-second notes. But just building chromatic scale confidence in a way that it takes the next step beyond practicing the chromatic scale or technical exercises built on the chromatic scale. Now, when you're learning etudes, I think it's important to consider, before you even, at the very beginning of the process, consider that no etude was written in a vacuum. And what I mean by that is that the composers who are writing etudes are writing them in the sound world of other composers. So before you start learning a particular etude, suppose you're working out of an etude book of works by all works by the same composer, you should ask yourself some probing questions before you begin to learn the notes. Who is the composer? What other music did they compose? Who were their contemporaries, or are their contemporaries? When was the etude book written? Who was the intended audience for the book? Is this a book for young players? Is this a book for the most advanced players? You know, you'll see these books will be titled very often something like 16 Easy Etudes or Virtuosic Studies. So these titles even tell a lot. Even if it's Virtuosic Study number 4, it still tells you a lot about the intended audience. And then I think it's very important to consider what flute literature was written during the same time. So if you look at one of my favorite etude books is the Karg Ehlert Etudes, and these were written around the turn of the century. So thinking about what other music was written during the same time will really make the etudes come to life and make more sense to you. So the next step is to start with score study. So we're going to keep our flute in its case as you begin to attack your etudes. A very useful approach for performance study is Jean Leroux's Guidelines for Style Analysis. It's the acronym is SHMERG, sound, harmony, melody, rhythm, and growth. So when you're looking at an etude, you want to consider, obviously these are single line melodies, but to consider things about the sound. What is the tone color? What's your timbre? What a sound sounds like? What combination of sounds sound like? What's the texture? Is it thick or thin? Obviously in an etude, it's going to be a solo line texture. What's the tessitura? What's the tessitura? Does it have a wide tessitura? Does it have a limited tessitura? Does it skip around a lot from low to high? Is it more melodic? What are the dynamics? Where's the loudest and softest point in the etude, and what is the range of sound that you want to convey? This next one, harmony, can be a little more challenging in an etude, but you want to consider, is this consonant or dissonant? What are the chord structures? So take some time to analyze your chords so you know what arpeggios are being played, what key center you're in. Is it major, minor? Is it atonal? All of this is going to help your brain eliminate possibilities. So if you are playing a piece, let's say an easy etude in C major, well, you're probably not going to have a lot of A sharps in it. You might have one or two, but probably not very many. And just knowing that will help you read the music more confidently and accurately. Think about the melody. Is it disjunct or conjunct, lyrical or more technical in nature? What kind of articulations appear? What is the role of the articulations? And then think about the rhythm. What rhythmic patterns appear? And how does the rhythm affect the melody or phrasing? And then the last one is growth. And this is another term for this would be form. So what is the form of the piece? And where are the phrases? So knowing what the form of the piece is going to help save you time in practicing. We'll get into that in a second here. So we're going to analyze the music before we practice. Here's an example of one of the cooler easy etudes, number 1, in fact, in C major. So we're going to analyze the form. And as you can see in this one, I've labeled it A prime, B prime. There's a transition that takes us back to A and A prime. And then we have a C part. And then the second C part is the same, but with octave displacement. And at the very end, we have a coda that appears, and it's basically just a giant C major arpeggio with an escape tone happening at the same place in the melody each time, which is the 4th note. So knowing that form will save us a lot of time in practicing, and understanding how the form works saves us time too. So once you've analyzed the form, you can start to make sense of the phrases. Where does this phrase start and stop? And once we have an idea about where the phrasing is, then we can decide on a breathing plan. Even if you haven't sight read it yet, you can make some reasonable assumptions on where you'll need to breathe. You might need to adapt your breathing plan as you learn. However, having a breathing plan before you even start practicing is going to save you a lot of time and energy. And then I think it's very important on any piece of music, but especially on etudes, is to take note of repetitions. In etudes, the repetitions tend to be more clear and obvious, whereas in a piece of literature, there are probably repetitions in there, but they might be slightly varied. So in this, we see that measure 1 through 3 is exactly the same as measure 5, 6, 7. And then the same thing, measure 9 and 10 are the same, or measure 9 is the same thing as measure 13, etc., etc. So there's a lot of repetition in this etude. So when we're practicing, and this can obviously be true for anything that you're practicing, but when you're practicing an etude, because it is that bridge from technique to repertoire, it's very important to be impeccable with fundamentals. So I like to use recording to assess my progress each day. Using the ideas of tone, time, and technique, ask yourself once you listen to your recording, am I playing, let's talk about tone first. So am I playing with a characteristic tone? Am I playing in tune? Am I practicing in tune with tone tools such as a tuner, drone, or other sounding sources? Am I breathing naturally and efficiently? For time, I want to think about the idea of rhythm and pulse. These are two separate ideas. Pulse is a steady underlying division of time, and rhythm is a vocabulary of time. And that the way that these two interact with each other creates an overall sense of time. So, am I playing with a strong sense of pulse? Am I subdividing? Am I playing accurate rhythms? Am I using a metronome or a click track? Am I practicing at a speed that promotes accuracy? And then in technique, I'm going to start very globally with my most fundamental idea of technique. Am I playing with a healthy body alignment, posture, and hand position? We want to set ourselves up from the very beginning for the most success possible. Am I accurately playing the pitches? You could refer back to, am I practicing at a speed that promotes accuracy for this as well? And then, am I accurately playing the articulations? And am I isolating difficult passages? I think we all know many different ways to tackle a difficult passage, whether it's practicing things in different rhythms or different articulations. Those are two ways. Chunking. There's a lot of ways to isolate passages, but we have to isolate the difficulties. So the next thing, I'm going to refer to Don Juan's Elegy, which is the first etude from his Etudes de Salon, and talk about developing a practice plan. Here's a sample practice plan for measures 1 through 8 from Don Juan's Elegy. So let's say you're assigned, you have your flute lesson on Monday, and your teacher says, okay, I want you to learn Elegy, Etude number 1 for next week's lesson. And you're going to go home and you're going to already have all of these other things that I went through put in place. And then you're going to make a practice plan for yourself. So what I've chosen to do in this one is to identify the bone structure notes. So right off the bat, when I look at the beginning of this piece, I see a whole lot of notes and a lot of 30-second notes, and that can be very intimidating. However, there's a melody here. And so I identify the bone structure notes in measure 1 through 8. They're circled in red, and you practice those only as a beautiful melody. Record it 10 times using different dynamics and phrasing. Use your metronome with quarters getting the beat at 60. Step 2. Practice each unique 30-second note pattern separately. So I've put in red boxes in your second photo here. You can see there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different 30-second note patterns. This is 8 measures of music, and it turns out there's only 8 unique 30-second note patterns. So I'm going to practice measure 8, or 1 through 8, practice each unique 30-second note pattern separately. I would start with my metronome on half time, so clicking the 8th note, and just practice those slowly, working them up, thinking about what kind of chords they are, and really just getting the fingers muscle memory connected with your theoretical knowledge and your oral skills. So when you start practicing these 30-second note patterns, you want to hear the notes in your head before you play them. The third thing you're going to do is to practice measures 1 through 8 with all notes as written, but we're going to keep the metronome at 60. with the eighths getting the beat. So I'm playing it in half time, and then I'm going to work my way up from there. So that would be a practice plan. I think it's up to ourselves to use our own imagination to develop a practice plan when you're learning any music yourself. So you can come up with every piece has its own practice plan that will emerge for yourself, but make a plan. I think it's really important that we use repetition to our advantage. So if you look at Etude number 6 here by Donjon, you can see that the piece, here's the first measure 1 through 30, and the piece actually only has 14 measures of unique sounds. So you could practice this completely out of order and just practice each unique chunk and build some technique and confidence in the notes, and then put it together in a more seamless, traditional, linear way. When we're practicing etudes, whether it's an etude or a piece of repertoire, it's very important to give ourselves permission to practice in a non-linear way, at least part of the time in your practice session. I like to spend a lot of time practicing the end of pieces, so that when I play the whole piece in entirety, I'm not worn out by the end and making silly mistakes because I ran out of jet fuel halfway through. If I'm learning a concerto, let's say a classical concerto like a Mozart concerto first movement, I know that the concerto first movement form is the sonata form, so it's exposition, development, and then recap. Well, the development is always going to be the most challenging part because it's a lot of different ideas all flying around at once. So when I'm practicing a concerto, I'll probably spend the bulk of my time practicing that development, as well as any cadenzas that might happen, and then put it together in a more linear way. Thank you for listening. And if you have any questions, please reach out to me directly at my email address, psurman@msudenver.edu. Thank you.